What's up folks, my name is Charit and I'm here with a walkthrough for another TryHackMe room, Chill Hack. So let's begin by deploying the machine, and while that's processing, let me prepare my workspace. First, I'm gonna connect to the VPN network. Alright, we're connected. So let's see our IP address. Gonna start up my handy notes app to record this information. Right, I have my IP address. So let's see if we have the machine deployed yet. It's always good to give few extra minutes for the machine to initialize, otherwise you'll be getting errors when you are enumerating the machine. So I'm gonna record the IP address of the target and let's see if the machine is live. Yes, the machine is live indeed. So why don't we begin with an nmap scan, SV for version checking, and SC for script tests, the IP address, and -VV for information. Okay, right off the bat we got 3 ports. Port 21 hopefully is FTP, port 22 hopefully SSH, and port 80 hopefully a web server. We're gonna have to wait for the results to know for sure. Alright, we have our results. Port 21 is indeed FTP and anonymous login is allowed for the FTP server. So why don't we try that first? So let me create a new folder for the stuff we discover. Okay, I'm gonna FTP into the IP address, and with anonymous login allowed, I'm gonna use the username anonymous. And why don't we try a blank password? And login was indeed successful. So if we look inside the FTP server, we got one text.txt file. So let's get that file to our local machine, and I believe that is all the use we have from the FTP server. Why don't we read what's in the note? So the message indicates the presence of some kind of a command execution platform, right? That might be our way into the machine, and it also gives us 2 user names, Apar and Anurodh. Okay, next let's move on to the web server. Okay, I'm just gonna type in the URL, the IP address of the target machine, and yes, we do get some kind of a web page hosted on the machine. Okay, the site is quite detailed, right? Now all these pages have content on them, but we are more interested in pages that would like let us log in, right? But it seems that these buttons are not yet implemented, so we need to find another way in to the back end of the website actually. So why don't we look for hidden directories? So I'm gonna use the URL IP address and a directory search and the word list if you're using Kali 2020 or newer versions, the word lists are in this folder. I'm going to use a word list by derb command.txt. It's a pretty small word list that's gonna go through quite quickly. So hopefully we might discover some abnormal folders listed inside the web server. Now these initial folders that the GoBuster reveals, these are actually quite common, the CSS. If you are a complete beginner, don't panic. You will eventually learn to identify these common folders through experience, right? But soon we'll get a result that actually stands out. We have a /secret folder which is actually out of place. So why don't we look inside the secret folder? Right, we have an input box and an execute button, which I believe is the command execution platform that the note was talking about. Now the source doesn't give us much, so I believe our only option is to try out some commands on this box, right? So why don't we try some Linux commands? The id command gives us the user id, and there we have some results. Pwd command prints the current directory, and yes, var/www/html is the default location of websites, and indeed we are in the /secret folder. So why don't we list out the content of this folder, and when we try the ls command we get this error, which actually proves the note which said that there are some kind of filtering going on. Now if you know about string filters, they actually try to identify patterns in the string, right? So why don't we try to confuse the filtering system? And I used many techniques, and what actually came through was using the semicolon and combining multiple commands as such. By the way, don't use a space, right, between the commands, just the semicolon, which indicates the end of the first command and beginning of a new command. These are basic bash scripting techniques, and indeed we do get the results of the ls command as well. So we have found a way to bypass the input verification process. Now we could enumerate this entire device just by using this vulnerability, but I would prefer a reverse shell for doing the enumeration. So why don't we find out some reverse shells online? You can try other reverse shells that you're familiar with, but you'll find out that the string filter often catches up those reverse shell commands. The only command that actually came through is the one right here. So I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna use the same trick, wd command, and I'm going to combine the reverse shell. I have to replace the IP address and the port number before execution. So let's begin the netcat listener on the same port, and let's see what happens. Right, we have a reverse shell in. The good thing about a reverse shell is those filters are no longer impacting our progress, right? Now a small issue with this reverse shell is it's not interactive. Simply I cannot use the up arrow key to retrieve the earlier command. So I'm gonna upgrade my reverse shell. So you might want to read up on these techniques. I'm gonna do what I usually do. First, I'm going to identify what version of Python is available. So I'm gonna use the which command to search available Python versions. The keyword Python indicates Python version 2 or earlier. Python 3, this keyword indicates Python version 3. Okay, so this is the command for upgrading our shell using Python 3. Single quote import pty.spawn /bin/bash. Now memorizing this command cannot do you any harm. Actually, it can be very useful, but you could record it on some kind of a note application, so you can copy paste it quickly. We are not done yet. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z to background the reverse shell. I'm gonna type in stty row-echo, and I'm gonna type in fg and press enter. You don't see the output, so you're going to press enter some couple of times and you get this fully interactive shell with auto completion and everything. Okay, now back to the enumeration. Now if I go up a directory, now I'm in the web site, right? The original site we discovered by navigating into the IP address. Now this content did not reveal much, but you could go through each single one of them and see if there are abnormalities. I'm gonna work my way up through the folder structure. Alright. And here is an abnormality. Now usually the websites served from a device are hosted in the /var/www/html folder, but we have an additional folder here called files. Let's check what's inside this folder. By the way, I'm using the words folder and directory interchangeably. I hope that's not confusing you. Okay, now any web page, when it loads a directory, it first loads this index.php file. So why don't we look inside to see what this hidden website is, right? Now since we are on a shell, we cannot render this website on a browser. We might need some extra steps to do that, but no matter, this is actually a better view if you can kind of analyze these HTML tags and whatnot. Now if we check from the top, what you're seeing here is actually some sort of a login form, and the user details are actually stored in a MySQL database, and the credentials to access the database are actually right here. Now here's the thing, you can actually enumerate the SQL database from within the device quite easily, but if you think about it and follow this logic, the purpose of the user verification is, if the username and password are correct, you get access to this hacker.php page. So why don't we cut out those extra steps and just read the hacker.php file, right? Now if you're curious, you can go through the account.php file, which actually holds the SQL query that lists that actually verifies the username and the password, and there's not much else in this file. But if we go to the hacker.php file, although this doesn't look very appealing because none of the images are present here. We actually have some interesting messages. So this gives us a clue that we are in some kind of a checkpoint that actually has some hidden clues. Now the only additional content I can see are these two images. And now that I've been through this room once, I know that the clue is actually hidden inside this specific image. So the question is, can we get that image into our local Kali Linux machine for further enumeration? The images are stored inside this images directory. So why don't we navigate into that? Alright. Now we have to transfer this file into our local machine. Now since we do have Python 3 on this machine, we can use the Python HTTP server to do that. Or otherwise we can use Netcat. I don't have any specific preference, so I'm gonna just go with the Netcat transmission method. So let's go to the project directory. Okay, we just have the note. So the Netcat transfer goes like this. So let's start by starting a Netcat listener LNVP using a different port number, and I'm going to direct the whatever input it captures into a file name, and I'm going to use the same file name of the image. Okay, now I can execute the listener, and over here, by the way, this method works because we have Netcat on the remote device, right? Otherwise you might have to go with the Python method, Python web server method. Okay, how do we do this? We use the Netcat command and the destination IP address, which is our native IP address, and the port number, and I'm going to use /w to indicate that the execution of the Netcat command must conclude once the transmission is finished. Alright, now I direct the image file into the Netcat Netcat program. So let's execute that and see what we get. Alright, execution completed, and let's check our native machine, and indeed we have some sort of an image file. Let's open it up, shall we? And indeed we do have some sort of an image. Now if you recall the message on the hacker.php file, it says look in the dark, so I assumed it's saying something about steganography, right? Information hidden inside images. So why don't we use steghide to see if there's indeed any information hidden within the image. Yes please. And I don't have a passphrase, so let's leave it blank, and indeed we do have some sort of zip file right here. We do have to use steghide to extract hidden files from the steg file. Yes, and the password is actually a blank, and we now have a zip file. Let's try to unzip this backup.zip file. It's asking for a password. We don't have a password. If we leave it blank, we actually get an error. So this is actually some kind of an password protected zip file. Now for brute forcing, I usually use fcrackzip, which actually did not work in this case. So I'm gonna move on with John the Ripper. But first we have to convert the zip file into a format that John the Ripper can actually brute force. So to do that, we are using a little application called zip2john. it's installed on Kali by default, right? So we're gonna feed in the backup.zip file, and the output is going to be printed on screen, which is not convenient. So I'm gonna redirect the output into a text file, which I'm gonna call, what shall I call it, backup.john, right? Okay, we have the backup.john file. Now I need sudo privileges to run John. I'm gonna use a word list to brute force all possible password combinations. The word list I'm using is the rockq.txt file, which is also available on Kali Linux. John. Now, since I have executed John the Reaper earlier, I can just view the password using the --show command, right? And right there is the password, and I'm going to use the password to unzip backup.zip file. Right, we retrieved .php file, so let's read that. And right here we're seeing another sort of a login form, I believe, and again a hard-coded password. So why don't we could actually decode this base 64 encoding and retrieve the real password, but that would not tell us the username. And indeed, if we move down, you can see if the password is correct, it prints out this message, welcome Anurodh, so which hints at the password is for the user account Anurodh. We are not sure if that is actually the valid password, but let's try it out, right? So I'm gonna use the built-in base 64 decoder. I'm gonna paste the base 64, that encoded message, and I'm gonna direct it into the 64-D, and there we have a password to proceed. So why don't we go back to the reverse shell, and I'm gonna see in fact we do have a user account named Anurodh, right? To do that, I'm gonna just list out all the user folders in /home folder. Yes, we do have an Anurodh, a PA user, and new user account Auric. Let's record that as well, and let's jump into the Anurodh's account by using the stu command and the password we retrieved. Oh, surprise, surprise, we access Anurodh's user account. So that means the password we recovered is indeed Anurodh's. Now remember, we could continue using this reverse shell, or just in case you actually drop the connection, you could also SSH into the remote machine at Anurodh's user account using the password we recovered, and we will still get a perfectly good shell, right? Although this is not necessary. Now we are in a privileged account. Now I'm going to continue with my reverse shell, and let's see a way to escalate our privileges, right? So a good thing to do first is to use the sudo -l command, and we see some special permission. We are allowed to execute this bash script as APA without using APA's password. Now if we check out what's inside user APA's home folder, there is this text file, right, which in fact is the user flag. Okay, so we cannot access this file, we cannot read this file as the user Anurod. So we could exploit this special script in order to read this file. So how you're gonna do that is, I'm gonna use sudo privileges but as user APA, and I'm going to execute this script. Yes, and it's asking for a name. I'm just gonna type some random stuff. Alright, the execution was successful, but we don't know what this script is actually doing. So why don't we read up the script. This is a simple bash script, and indeed what it does is it prints this message. It has this read command, which is basically similar to an input command in Python, if you're familiar with Python, and stores the user input into this variable named person, and here it recovers the variable person using the $sign, and in this read statement it recovers an input to this variable message, and right here the $message, the input is actually executed by the script. So I'm curious, if I input some sort of a Linux command into this message variable, will it get executed? So why don't we try that? So we're going to use the same sudo command. I'm going to enter a random name, and I'm going to enter a Linux command to the message, and indeed we do have execution, and the command gets executed as user APA, and since only user APA can read the local.txt file, you could simply do a cat command. Let's try that again. Cat home slash apar slash local.txt and get the user flag. Now all that remains is for us to get root access. So in order to do that, I'm going to see what other capabilities are there for the user Anurod, right? Now these steps, there are many steps to go through, right? It took hours of enumeration, but I'm gonna just reveal the step that actually gave me the privilege escalation information. So if you try the id command, it reveals that the user Anurod has some access to Docker. Now a good resource to keep in hands reach is this GTF4 bins. So it is a list of privilege escalation techniques, and I'm gonna just search for Docker. Indeed we have some listings. So I'm not a Docker guru. I don't actually use Docker in my daily life. I know some things about that, but I'm not going to go into details about Docker, but the simple thing is you can use the command from GTA for bins and the instructions in order to escalate privileges. Now if you are planning on actually progressing in ethical hacking and penetration testing, I would recommend that you read up about Docker, read up why this command actually works, right? What's the vulnerability that's allowing this to happen, so that if you encounter this again, you know exactly what's going on, right? But for the time being, I'm just gonna copy the command and show you that it actually works. So we got a blank prompt, but if I try the id command, yes, we actually realize we are now in a shell as root user, which means I can navigate into the /root folder, and if you check what's inside this folder, we can see that this proof.txt file, which actually is the root flag. So that actually concludes the tasks for this row. I hope the information I provided was useful, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again with another walkthrough. Cheers.